El último! The last video that you're going to have to take and look at in nutrition unless something has not gone correctly. Anyway, we won't talk about that. So our last little session is going to be on nutrition and aging, or the older adult. We're going to basically skip the adult because all we do is get fat and just sit around and do nothing. Anyway, so we're going to go do nutrition in the older adult and look at that. But before we do, what I want to do is my last little lesson for you. And it has to do with, if I can get this going, the mousetrap. So let me leave you with this story dealing with the mousetrap, and hopefully it will encourage you. The mouse looked through the crack in the wall to see the farmer and his wife opening a package. What food might this contain? The mouse wondered. He was devastated to discover it was a mousetrap. Retreating to the farmyard, the mouse proclaimed the warning. "There's a mousetrap in the house! There's a mousetrap in the house!" The chicken clucked and scratched, raised her head, and said, "Mr. Mouse, I can tell this is a grave concern to you, but it is of no consequence to me. I cannot be bothered with it." The mouse turned to the pig and told him, "There's a mousetrap in the house! There's a mousetrap in the house!" The pig sympathized, but said, "I'm so very sorry, Mr. Mouse, but there's nothing I can do about it but pray. Be assured you are in my prayers." The mouse turned to the cow and said, "There's a mousetrap in the house. There's a mousetrap in the house." The cow said, "Wow, Mr. Mouse, I'm sorry for you, but it's no skin off my nose." So the mouse returned to the house, head down and dejected, to face the farmer's mousetrap alone. That very night, a sound was heard throughout the house, like the sound of a mousetrap catching its prey. The farmer's wife rushed to see what was caught. In the darkness, she could not see that it was a venomous snake, whose tail the trap had caught. The snake bit the farmer's wife. The farmer rushed to the hospital, and she returned home with a fever. Everyone knows you treat a fever with fresh chicken soup. So the farmer took his hatchet to the farmyard for the soup's main ingredient. But his wife's sickness continued, so friends and neighbors came to sit with her around the clock. To feed them, the farmer butchered the pig. The farmer's wife did not get well, she died, so many people came to the funeral. The farmer had the cow slaughtered to provide meat for all of them. The mouse looked upon it all from his crack in the wall with great sadness. So the next time you hear someone is facing a problem and think it doesn't concern you, remember, when one of us is threatened, we are all at risk. We are all involved in this journey called life. We must keep an eye out for one another and make an extra effort to encourage one another. Okay, so I will leave you with that, but we will go on. So nutrition and aging. The challenge is, number one, we don't have a good handle on the older adult nutrition because there's a lot of differences between people within different age groups. I mean, let's think about it. When you're pregnant, basically everybody has the same needs when you're pregnant. Basically everybody has the same needs when you're preschool, or when you're school age, or when you're an adolescent, when you're an adult. Okay? But the question becomes, when you're 60 years old, okay, if you look at the DRIs, they basically are 51 plus. Well, I'm sorry, there's a lot of difference between a 51-year-old and an 80-year-old. Okay? But there's no differentiation there. And within each age group is, there are 70-year-olds that can't even feed themselves, and there are 70-year-olds that could outwork me. Okay? Same with 80. There are 80-year-olds that look like they're 60 or 50, and they are very active and they do lots of things, and then there are 80-year-olds that are bedridden. So there's lots of variation within age groups of the aging. You cannot prescribe and say all 70-year-olds need this, because there's such a variation in 70-year-olds. So it's very difficult. And so it's an individual basis, person to person. You have to prescribe a specific food intake plan based on their activity, based on their medications, based on a lot of different things that are involved there. So we really don't have a good handle. The other question is, when do we become an older adult? When are you an older adult? Is it 60? Is it 65? Is it 70? Is it when you start getting discounts? Believe me, I'm going to start, when I get that, I'm going to start getting all the discounts I could. I don't care. I don't, doesn't matter to me. I'm going to take every discount I can get. When is that? Again, there's 70-year-olds that I wouldn't consider an older adult as far as physically and mentally, because they're more in tune than a 60-year-old. So when are you an older adult? It's a question that can't be answered, except somebody prescribes and says, well, at 65 we're going to call you an older adult. Well, this depends. 65-year-old, 100 years ago would be definitely old. It'd be lucky if they survived that long. But this day and age, a 65-year-old is considered fairly young still, since our the age, length of life has gone up and up and up. So it's a hard question. So there really are no hard answers for when you are an older adult, or what should be prescribed for a specific older adult. So the goal really is, number one, doesn't matter what age you're at, is do whatever's necessary nutritionally and medically to reduce future health problems. So reduce the risk of osteoporosis, reduce the risk of cancer, reduce the risk of heart disease, those kinds of things. But it's actually, as a dietitian, it became very difficult to have a physician send a 75-year-old to be on a reduced cholesterol diet. I mean, for heaven's sake, they're 75 years old. And part of the problem is the mental aspects of health, is that at 75 years old, a lot of people, eating is their pleasure. I mean, that's when they get together with other people, that's when they do things, that's what they enjoy. And to take that away from them, you kind of wonder sometimes mentally if it will cause them to break down. But anyway, that's one of the goals, and to improve their well-being and self-esteem, because as you get older, you start losing some self-esteem. People look at you differently. They act about you differently. It's just a different aspect that people, look at you, and so you can start losing self-esteem, and things start going wrong, and you're breaking down physically, and it's just hard mentally to do that. So whatever you can do to raise their self-esteem is an important issue. So some of this seems pretty negative, but just again, as a dietitian, as a nutritionist, as a nurse, or a healthcare professional, this is what you have to deal with when somebody comes in, because there's a lot of things are going on that can affect nutrition. Decreased taste acuity. Things don't taste as good as you don't taste spices, you don't taste flavors as well, and your thirst acuity is way down. You don't know when you can drink, so I encourage you to drink as much as possible, even though you're not thirsty. Gastrointestinal, get nausea and upset stomach and things like that. Digesting of food is not as good as it used to be. Your immune system is just not working as well. You get sick a lot more. There's just different things that happen. Depression, advertising saying, oh, you need to do this if you're older. You need to take this, Geritol or whatever it is. You need to take this. And so you believe advertising. and sometimes it's not correct that you need to do all this. But depression can be from eating alone. Your significant other, your spouse or whatever has died, and you're fixing. I mean, some of if you live alone, how you don't tend to fix a huge meal just for yourself. You just don't do that, and so you pick up fast food, or you pick up something that's easy, throw a hot dog and a piece of bread and throw some mustard on it, and you're good to go. Same thing with an older adult, and that's not good, because the inefficiency of their digestive system, they need quality of nutrients. That's why it's pretty important for them to eat with other people. In facilities and in senior care centers, where they can get together and eat. It's pretty important in that aspect. Food habits that may be ingrained that possibly they need to change. Immobility, having to count on somebody else to take you where you need to go. You can't get groceries unless somebody comes and picks you up, and that kind of thing. Illnesses that you have. Lots of things that are going to affect nutritional status, and choices that you make. Again, whether you can eat your food, whether you're have the ability to chew your food. You may not be able to. You may have lost your teeth. Can't afford to get false teeth or something. There's just lots of aspects that come into play when you're talking about nutrition and aging. So it's not an easy part of life for nutritionists or healthcare providers to maintain adequate health. It's really depends on the individual and mentally what they can do for themselves. What are the nutritional concerns? Obesity is always an issue because high fat foods taste good. High fat foods are easy to chew. High fat foods are cheap. And on it goes. So obesity is a big problem, and then that leads to type 2 diabetes. Constipation is a problem because of inactivity, not getting enough fluids. That can be a problem. So it can be an issue that way. Osteoporosis, we've talked enough about that. Anemia, again, not getting adequate iron, because you can't afford meat, or you can't afford things that have a lot of iron in them. And that can be an iron deficiency anemia or a B12 folic acid anemia. Either of those, because you're just not getting adequate nutrition. Periodontal disease, we just talked about that, where you just can't chew your food, and so you tend to choose foods that are very soft, but also, because they taste good, salty foods and things that are high fat. They just taste good to us, and so that's what is chosen. Drug therapy can be a big issue. Diuretics, I don't need to read this, but older individuals is what keeps physicians in business and pharmacies in business, and so these medications can do a lot to affect nutrition and absorption of nutrients and that kind of thing. So you can see that the different types of drugs what their effects can have on nutritional status. Antacids, and though we've talked a little bit about antacids, and some seniors, older adults take antacids just because they don't want to get heartburn, that kind of thing. Mineral oil can fat soluble vitamins can attach to them, and mineral oils aren't absorbed, so they will just go out. They're taken to keep this system regular, kind of a thing. And then we talked a little bit about antibiotics before, alcohol. So drugs are a huge concern nutritionally, and it's very important. Hopefully the pharmacist will explain to individuals what nutrition is going to affect, or hopefully there will be a physician that would talk to them, or a dietitian or something. The hope would be that at some point physicians would refer older individuals to a dietitian so they can go over some of these things that would be important. So what are the requirements? Again, these are pretty broad-based because it depends individual to individual. But when we're talking about energy, we said age. As you age, your basal metabolism rate goes down. So if we're looking at somebody who is 70 years old, 80 years old, their BMR could be 200 calories less per day just sitting around than a 20-year-old kind of a thing, and reduced activity. So energy requirements are about 600 calories less per day than they used to be, and that's hard if you enjoy food and food is a big part of your day. Some individuals, that's all they look for. They look forward to breakfast, lunch, and dinner because that's something they can do, kind of a thing. And they may nibble all day. One of the senses that you do not lose is the sense for sweet. And so a lot of older adults will eat a lot of sweets because they can actually taste it. But you know where that goes. Protein, you get less efficient. And so for normal adults, it's 0.8 grams per kilogram ideal body weight. And so for protein here, 1.2 grams per kilogram ideal body weight. And so it goes up, and not again because they need more protein to build up, kind of a thing, but being less efficient, it takes 1.2 grams to get just as much as they used to get out of 0.8 grams. So protein requirement goes up as you get older. And carbohydrates, again, the goal would be to increase complex, again, to get the fiber in for the constipation issue, and that kind of thing. Lipids, decrease those, as you can imagine, because of the calorie, but also because they're going to tend to be less nutrient dense. So that would be a goal. And vitamins of concern, vitamin D, because there's no sunshine, they don't get out, usually covered up when they go outside. Supplement may be necessary there. Vitamin C tends to be low because of not a lot of fruits and vegetables that they eat. B6 has been found to be deficient. B12 is deficient. So again, high quality nutrient foods are important, but they're expensive. They're more expensive than high fat foods, and maybe hard to chew, to get real vegetables and things like that. So recommendation probably would be for a multivitamin mineral supplement. The other issue is they're not getting phytochemicals if they're not getting fruits and vegetables and things like that. But B12 comes from meats. Maybe they're not able to afford meats. Vitamin D from milk. Maybe as you get older, sometimes you do get lactose intolerant. Maybe that's a problem. So there are some issues that need to be addressed. Minerals of concern, iron, always iron, and calcium have always been issues, especially for women in every single survey that's ever been done. So chromium, for whatever reason, they're finding deficient, maybe because of malabsorption. You don't need a lot of chromium, but you do need some. And then zinc can be an issue with taste and that kind of thing. So these, again, studies have shown these are the minerals and vitamins and minerals that have been most often of concern. Fluid intake, again, their thirst acuity is way down, so they don't feel thirsty. And they tend, as you know, if you've been to Grandma and Grandpa's house, they tend to keep the heat way up, so they can dehydrate pretty easily because they lose a lot of moisture from the high heat. And so there is no recommendation for fluids, really. They say 8 glasses a day, but nobody knows if that's good, bad, or ugly for sure. Nobody has any idea how much, but they're saying at least 8 glasses a day. Now, do they have to take these as pure, like water kind of thing? No, because coffee, tea, soups, fruits and vegetables are 80% or more water. So they can get a lot from those kinds of things. They don't have to actually drink physically 8 glasses of pure water per day, but they need to get the equivalent. and they may not feel thirsty, but they may eat high-fat foods that are low in moisture, low in water, so that becomes a problem with that. So anyway, that finishes our section. That finishes our videos. I thank you for keeping up with us and maintaining till the end, and hopefully this will follow you through your career, and hopefully I've given you enough information that you can answer some questions along the way. So good luck down the road, and maybe we'll see you face to face someday.